Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our very first session for our Pune Strong Virtual Resource Fair. This morning, for our very first session and our breakout session this morning, we have Julie Mitchell from Kuikahi Mediation Center. Julie has been the Executive Director for Kuikahi Mediation Center in East Hawaii since 2012. The nonprofit Community Mediation Center offers mediation, facilitation, and training to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Ms. Mitchell graduated as a magna cum laude with a BA in sociology and a minor in philosophy from the University of California, Irvine. After moving to East Hawaii in 1998, she worked as an education coordinator for the Volcano Arts Center as a general manager of Friends of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Ms. Mitchell holds a certificate in professional development for not-for-profit management from the Hawaii Community College and is a graduate of the Hawaii Island Leadership Series, Ulumau, the Leadership Work Experience, and the Weinberg Fellows Program. She received a 2016 AIM for Excellence Award for outstanding achievement in nonprofit management. In addition to administrative duties, Ms. Mitchell is also a mediator, facilitator, and a trainer for Kuikahi. So thank you and welcome, Julie. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Ray. Aloha, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you folks here virtually. I want to mahalo all the organizers of the Pune Strong Virtual Resource Fair for inviting me to present. As Ray mentioned, my name is Julie Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director with Kuikahi Mediation Center. And I'll put a link to our website in the chat. So if anyone wants to check out a little bit more about us, you can go to our website. And Kuikahi Mediation Center, we are located in Hilo and we serve all of East Hawaii. So from Hamakua to Ka'u. We are one of 5 nonprofit community mediation centers in the state. And on this island, we are lucky to also have West Hawaii Mediation Center serving the west side. Our mission is to empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options and to find their own best solutions. To achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and training, like this one, to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. The topic of my talk today is Landlord Tenant Mediation, Preventing Eviction and Homelessness. So I am going to do some chatting first because we have an hour together and talk about some things I want to get to. And then I'm also going to share a PowerPoint presentation as well. First, I'm going to share 2 stories of how mediation helped with housing issues during these tough COVID times, which have now been going on for over 1.5 years. It seems very hard to believe. So first story, last summer, a landlord came to our office and they were really in despair because they were on a fixed income and they depended on the previously reliable funds from their longtime tenant. Rent had not been paid for many months due to COVID-related difficulties. The landlord came to us. They did a brief client intake over the phone with our case manager, who then subsequently called the tenant. Mediation services and additional resources were offered, along with reassurances that the landlord valued the tenant and wanted to keep them housed. And the next week, the tenant attempted to get caught up on rent and discussed directly with the landlord a clear plan for the future. So in this situation, a neutral third party, our case manager, bridged the communication gap, which allowed both landlord and tenant to acknowledge these are very challenging times while also expressing care to each other. And dignity, respect, and relationship were preserved for both clients. Another scenario happened. A landlord was trying to evict their tenant, even though at that time, a state eviction moratorium remained in place. So this was prior to August 6th when it expired. And it turned out that the tenant actually wanted to leave. So through mediation, trying to do conflict resolution, the landlord avoided a potential eviction moratorium violation, which was at that time punishable by up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. And the tenant was able to move out with all overdue rent waived and only the security deposited forfeited. And it felt like a win-win to both clients. So mediation can be both transactional and relational. It's about engaging the head and the heart. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between court and mediation. So in court, the judge decides. In mediation, the participants decide. In court, the proceedings are public. In mediation, the proceedings are private. In court, people usually feel very intimidated. It's a formal process and you're going before someone with a lot of power, the judge. And in mediation, people are made to feel comfortable and in an informal setting. And maybe some people are intimidated by the mediators, but since they're not deciding their fate, I think that after a while, people get very comfortable with them. And once a case gets all the way to court, the judge is likely to refer it to mediation anyway. So trying mediation first can save on court costs like filing fees, service fees, attorney's fees, as well as a lot of time and energy. And often that energy is mental and emotional, not to mention having to take time off work and find childcare, etc. If the issue is not fully resolved in mediation, all other options, including legal options, remain available to our clients. So according to some statistics that were shared with us by Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, these are stats for Oahu, by the way, 75% of landlords are represented by attorneys and only 3.5% of tenants are represented by attorneys. Also, about 50% of tenants do not show up for court, meaning there's a default judgment against them, meaning they award for the landlord just by the fact that the tenants did not show up for court. So one thing about mediations is that it can help level the playing field and increase access to justice. So the neutral third-party mediator stays conscious of any power imbalances, makes sure everyone has an equal chance to both talk and be heard, and listen carefully to what the other person's saying to try to understand, to discuss options, and to really look for solutions that are workable for everyone involved. The idea is to find mutually satisfying solutions. In court, the judge's decisions are limited and bound by the rule of law. In mediation, participants can come up with very creative solutions beyond what can be accomplished in court. So for example, in court, a judge can grant a legal judgment for a sum of money, like a lump sum. Then the winner has to figure out how to collect that money. So let's say somebody is granted $1,000, I've heard, and then they ask the judge, well, how do I get that money? I've actually heard one judge who since retired in small claims court say, I'm sorry, I'm not a collection agency. You'll have to figure that out. In mediation, participants come up with things like a detailed repayment plan, and they can even negotiate the amount of money that will satisfy an issue. For example, I remember very early on when I first started doing mediations, there was a credit card debt that was in the amount of $5,000, and the debtor made an offer of a $1,000 as a lump sum payment, and the credit card company said yes to that. So by the time cases get to court, often the situation has escalated and relationships have been compromised. The simple act of filing against someone else can create ill will, fear, anger, intimidation. And if mediation were tried first, this escalation of perceived or real threat could be avoided, reducing the fight, flight, or freeze responses. So in housing situations, anyone can initiate mediation. It could be the renter, the owner, the property manager, the landlord. And what happens is our case manager will reach out to the other involved parties to invite them to participate. So in most cases, mediation is a voluntary process, meaning that folks can say yes or no. So sometimes just the offering of mediation as an option can really lessen tension between participants, as in that very first example. Silence can actually create conflict because people can read whatever they want into that silence and make assumptions about what the lack of communication means, often inaccurately. In mediation, we can help participants to reality check their situations. We can ask what they understand their legal responsibilities to be and assess whether they understand things like the eviction moratorium previously, the current rules around Act 57, and the Landlord Tenant Code. If needed, we can ask the participants in mediation to do a little online research while they're waiting when the mediators are talking with the other person in a private session. While we don't give any sorts of legal advice or counseling, we do point people in the right direction to help them learn and research what their legal rights are. That way they are able to participate more meaningfully in the mediation process. For example, if after looking up the Landlord Tenant Code, a landlord realizes that they didn't give proper notice and a court case might not go their way, they might be much more amenable to settling the matter in mediation. Encouraging frank and productive dialogue is critical more now than ever. Landlords may not be able to afford losing good tenants. It's very expensive to try to go through the whole process of getting someone in there, especially if you've had somebody who's, who's worth keeping. It's just COVID has created a problem with people's incomes, as everybody on this in this session well knows. And tenants really can't afford to be owing thousands of dollars in back rent and then to be faced with, eviction procedures months down the line, award for damagement, garnishments of wages, ruined credit ratings. It can really affect a tenant to have an eviction on their record, like preventing them. They might lose Section 8 or other types of housing situations. And tenants who are in financial difficulties may not know what community assistance programs are available. Even though there's been emergency rental and utility assistance available on Hawaii Island the whole time, there's a lot of news coming out of Oahu saying, oh, it's closed or it's not available. We found that people still don't know what's available to them, and more is available to them now through service providers on Hawaii Island. And so our case manager and the mediators are able to connect people with these resources and referrals so they can find out, what they can get. For both landlords and tenants, having an opportunity to talk to someone is key. People want to be heard. The case manager and the mediator serves as a listening ear, as a sounding board for people to explore how would they like to proceed. We describe mediation as a self-determination process. Again, since mediation is voluntary, everyone has to be willing to proceed, and everybody has to be willing to make a decision about their own circumstances and take that on. The case manager, when a client first calls, acts as an intermediator. They then reach out to talk to the other person, whether it's the landlord or the tenant, in advance of the mediation session. And this has sometimes opened the door for them to talk directly to one another once the case manager has paved the way and they feel safe for a direct conversation about these tough situations. Sometimes both the landlords and the tenants have been scared to talk to each other. They're uncertain, they don't have all the answers, they're afraid of doing something wrong, going against what the current laws are. There's been a lot of confusion about the state eviction moratorium, the CDC federal eviction moratorium, all of which are now gone. And then there's the new law, Act 57, which has changed the law for 1 year. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. So through our case manager and our mediators, we're able to open these lines of communication so that people are aware of what the current situation is for landlords and tenants. And landlords, we found, have also not had access to all the resources available to them. They don't know how to access the rental assistance or what's entitled to them. Rental assistance is paid directly to the landlord. It doesn't even go to the tenant, it goes directly to the landlord in their bank account. So our case manager, our mediators have been able to educate around that. And then some landlords have called us, regularly to check in. They were checking in on when does the eviction moratorium expired? Well, okay, it expired August 6th for the state of Hawaii. And sometimes they've been telling our case manager, you're the only person I can talk to about this situation. And having that listening ear helps the landlords feel heard and understood. And same with the tenants. We are trying to connect landlords and tenants with the legal information they need. So there's the legal aid website, there's the Department of Commerce and Community Affairs, which has the landlord tenant line and the handbook posted. There is a lot of confusion around Act 57 and the new requirement for 15-day notices for eviction for non-payment of rent, which I'm going to get to shortly by showing a PowerPoint about the statewide landlord tenant eviction mediation program. I would like to share with you specifically our webpage on the landlord tenant issue. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And this webpage has a lot of the resource we're providing to landlords and tenants, explains the program, and we try to keep the resource list updated. We post documents from legal aid like landlord rights and responsibility, tenant rights and responsibilities, and they've been updating those, practically monthly to make sure they're accurate. Rental assistance programs have made full or partial rental payments possible. It's for up to 15 months now, any 15 months going back to spring 2020 and also into the future. So if you only need like 3 months now and 3 months throughout the rest of the year, that's possible. And getting that rental assistance can really go a long way toward making landlords want to continue negotiating options in the future with the tenant. It shows that effort is being made. And, if landlords can get up to that 15 months of rent covered via the Hawaii County Rental Assistance Program, that's an incentive to recoup up to tens of thousands of dollars. There's also other programs available, such as there's a very low income program through Catholic Charities Hawaii. So if people have already gotten the 15 months from the Hawaii County service providers, they can also access additional funds through places like Catholic Charities Hawaii. So people in conflict often focus on each other as the problem, like this, going head to head. And what mediation does is to try to help people focus together on the issues, looking jointly at the problem, seeing if they can solve it together. So whether it's neighbors or homeowners associations or landlords and tenants, when people sit down together and try to see each other's perspectives, their shared humanity, they can often come up with ways to move forward in some extremely creative ways that neither they nor the mediators could have predicted in advance. So when I do mediation, sometimes I'll think at the beginning, oh, maybe there's going to be an agreement, maybe there's not. And if I hear myself doing that, I just have to tell myself to be quiet, Julie. You don't know what's going to happen. And so we have seen solutions that are like work trades for rent, cash for keys in lieu of foreclosure, tenants in common finding a path forward where previously none seemed possible. So the solutions in mediation are as creative as the people who are participating. Mediation as a preventative measure can be employed widely as well. So by low-income housing managers, property management agencies, landlords, social service agencies, and others with advanced arrangements. Tenants can bring their own case managers, social workers, or other support persons with them to mediation. We would love if people pledge to try mediation first before taking legal action around housing issues. Trying to address issues at the lowest possible level and as early as possible is the goal in conflict prevention and resolution. So mediation can be employed as one diversion strategy to help people prevent being evicted or becoming houseless. Rental assistance is another. And I have 2 more real life stories I'm going to share before we go to Act 58 and my PowerPoint on the statewide landlord tenant eviction mediation program. Okay, first, this was when COVID was really serious back in the last winter. Can't believe we're almost into the next winter. So that a tenant had returned from the mainland after visiting his mother. And at that time, there was the 14-day mandatory quarantine in effect. And when the other tenants saw him in the laundry room and the trash area without a mask on, they complained to the property manager, who gave the tenant an eviction notice, which we know from an earlier story had some potential negative ramifications. At that point, it was a year or up to $5,000 in jail. $5,000 in fines or up to a year in jail. During mediation, the tenant and the property manager were able to hear each other out. They were able to mend their relationship. And since the quarantine was almost up, they agreed to drop the threat of eviction and convert it to a first warning as outlined in the lease. And so the tenant was able to maintain his housing, and once the 14 days were up, reunite with his family in the unit. Another story, a tenant had offered their landlord partial rent during COVID. The landlord declined it. At that time, people thought COVID was going to be over in a few months. During mediation, it surfaced that the landlord wasn't happy with the tenant for a number of reasons, and the tenant was equally unhappy with the landlord for many other reasons. And through discussions, they agreed to work together to get as much rental assistance as possible to cover the past due rent. They both agreed to provide any required documentation in a timely manner for the rental assistance and to keep in contact with each other about where the status of the rent relief application was, what amount was offered, and when it had been paid. Okay, so let me share my screen and talk about our program here. So there is a free statewide landlord tenant eviction mediation program in place for all counties. This was launched after the state eviction moratorium ended on August 6th, and it was created due to Act 57. Now, let me see, how do I advance my slides here? Okay, there we go. So this new law, Act 57, it was created by the state legislature. Its intention was to prevent the courts from being flooded with eviction and from people being out on the streets. So what it says is that tenants must be offered the opportunity to mediate when they're served with an eviction notice for non-payment of rent. It's voluntary for the tenant. It's mandatory for the landlord. So the landlords who are evicting for non-payment of rent have to give the 15-day notice simultaneously to their tenant and to the mediation center in the county where their tenant resides. So on this island, we have two mediation centers. I talked about the west side and the east side. So hopefully you can see on the screen that in East Hawaii, they're going to be contacting Kuikahi Mediation Center. We have a special email set up, landlord tenant at hawaiimediation.org. And once we get the notice, we send a confirmation as outlined in Act 57 saying that we received the notice, and it starts the clock ticking. So for tenants, it is really important for them to call us right away when they receive the eviction notice for the landlord, because we have a limited time to schedule a mediation. So in East Hawaii, the tenants call us at 808-935-7844 extension 8. And we can have an interpreter on the line to assist if that is needed. The case manager is going to ask the tenant to do an intake over the phone. So they're going to ask for basic information. And somebody is not muted, and we're hearing you now. So I don't know if Ray, you can mute those folks. In 2022, and it's called, I see that there's 3 people not muted.
Or something like of that sort. Yeah. Like new
Laura Lynn.
New everything. And it's supposed to be opening up new funding for community-based organizations, so on. So
I'm gonna pause for a minute. Ray, are you able to deal with this?
Ashley Horowitz. That's what I got to catch this morning.
Hi, can everybody please mute your mics, please?
I think you may be able to do mute the 2 people who aren't muted, which are Phil and Laura Lynn.
Okay.
So I'm just pausing here, folks, to try to get that dealt with. Okay. Ray, are you able to get them muted? I am
working on it
okay.
as we speak.
Okay. Sorry, folks. A little pause. Give me a chance to catch my breath and drink some water. You usually just right click on the person and you can mute them. Okay. Okay, let me keep going because I hear silence while you're working on that. So,
Sure.
We'll work with the tenant to explain this program, why it's a benefit, and then we'll schedule mediation. We normally are doing it Monday through Friday during business hours, but we could do evenings or Saturday on a case-by-case basis. And then we'll notify the landlord the date and time of the scheduled mediation. So if we are not, so let me put it this way, we are asking the tenant to reach out and contact us, and we are also simultaneously reaching out to them because the landlord will have provided us with as much contact information as possible, phone, email, addresses. So we are reaching out, you know, via phone, text, email, snail mail, whatever way we can to try to get people, because we are required to schedule the mediation session within 15 days from the date of the notice, though we do not have to hold the mediation session within those 15 days. If we are not able to schedule, the landlord is able, according to Act 57, to move forward with the eviction. Sometimes they're nice and they will give us a little more time if we're having a hard time. And then after 30 days from the date of the notice, the landlord can begin filing for eviction in court. Now, even though they can begin the filing process, that takes a little bit of time. So we still have an opportunity to continue to schedule a mediation at that point. So, but we do have, we as the Mediation Center are required to honor this 15 and the 30 days as much as we possibly can. So once the mediation session is scheduled, the landlord and the tenant get an electronic notice of the date and time in mediation, and they also get a Zoom link to the mediation session. So we are doing most mediations just in general for our entire center via Zoom. It requires people to have some kind of device that enables them to get online. That also requires somewhere where you can get internet access and you know, good enough access. I know at my house it's extremely limited. So we do invite both our clients and our mediators who have accessibility issues or device issues to come use our equipment in our offices. And on a case-by-case basis, if we really need to do something all in person, we can arrange that too, though everyone has to do, you know, COVID precautions. So how can tenants prepare for mediation? Well, it's a really good idea ahead of time to check out the rental assistance programs and figure out what is required to apply. There are 6 providers here on Hawaii Island who are all providing the same rental assistance. So people will need to apply to one of them. If they apply to all 6, it's like a duplicative efforts. They're just repeating themselves and wasting time. They share a database. So applying for one of the 6 in Hawaii County. Talk to an attorney. So like Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, it's free services. They've got a lot of resources on their website. And it's a good idea to know, or at least go to our website and see what the tenant's rights and responsibilities are according to the legal aid paperwork. And then think about, what are the outcomes I would like to see here? What can I realistically do? What can my budget afford now? What's a timeline for me to accomplish all of these things? What are my future plans? Am I staying? Am I going? Am I getting a new job? Am I moving back in with family? Am I, you know, getting a roommate so we can afford the rent together? Also, there's financial counselors available. There are a new housing navigator program. I mean, there's a lot of resources available right now due to funding that came from the federal level down to the states and the counties. So there are housing counselors, financial counselors who can help you think about, what is a realistic budget? What can you afford for rent, or even for your mortgage if you're listening to this and you're a homeowner? And then what alternative housing arrangements are there? Can I get on the Section 8 wait list? Do I have an opportunity to downsize and live somewhere that's more within my budget? Whoops. Let's see, did I go too far? Okay, so how is mediation going to work? What does it look like? Okay, so we have a mediation and confidentiality agreement that we send out to everyone in advance to electronically sign before the mediation. What does that include? Let me go over a little bit with you. Number one, it says that mediators take the privacy of our clients very seriously. We do not go home and tell our friends and family members what happened in mediation. It's a very small town here. We don't run up to you in KTA if we see you and ask for a status update on the situation. We're going to just pretend like we've not met you before. It states that communications in mediation are confidential. What does that mean? That means that anything that you are discussing in mediation or negotiating in mediation that are not just common knowledge, like your lease is common knowledge, what happened is common knowledge, all of those you could share at a court of law if you end up there. But you couldn't discuss negotiations or draft agreements in a court of law. The confidentiality agreement also says that you're not going to subpoena me as the mediator or anyone associated with our mediation center to court to testify on your behalf. And we are mandated reporters. So if we hear threats of harm to self or others, child abuse, elder abuse, we will be reporting it. And it talks about there's no audio or visual recording allowed. You can't have someone else in the room with you that we don't know is there. And it's basically going over how clients are protected and how the mediation center is protected. We do provide interpreters if English is not the tenant or the landlord's primary language. We can do that for intakes over the phone, and we can do that for Zoom mediations or in-person mediations. For landlord tenant situations, we're scheduling usually for 1.5 hours. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes a little bit more. For general mediations, not in this program, we ask people to put aside up to 3 hours for a session. And how does the mediation session work? Well, it starts out with everyone together. The mediator does an introductory statement that will go over everything I just said about the confidentiality agreement. It also says something like this. Hi, my name is Julie. I'm going to be your mediator here today. I'm really glad that you two chose to sit down together to try mediation to deal with your situation. Mediation is a process by which you folks are the decision makers, not the mediators. So I am not going to tell you what to do or give you advice or make suggestions or offer what your legal options are. What I am going to do is I'm going to facilitate a dialogue between the two of you. And what I'd like you to do is listen carefully to what the other person says. I would like you to share honestly what's been going on for you. And if there is a will on both of your parts, we can have agreement here today. So that requires a little flexibility, a little give and take, and a little creative thinking. So remember that when we get farther along, and I'm going to remind you of that a bit later. Also, how the structure of mediation is going to go is we're starting out all together. After I finish giving you this overview, I am going to speak with you. I'm going to ask each of you to share briefly about what brought you to mediation and what's on the agenda for today and what you're hoping we might accomplish here. After that, we'll meet privately with each of you, and we'll do that a few times. And then towards the end, we'll come back together and have a discussions and see where we are. We might negotiate live. We might have negotiated already. And if there is a meeting of the minds, we will write it up and memorialize it in a written agreement. And we will also see if we need another mediation session or what other next steps are needed, because sometimes we can't resolve things in one time. We have to do more research and go off and do a little homework. So we do have a few ground rules in mediation. One, most importantly, is try to listen without interruption. So one voice at a time. I may interrupt you if you are not following the ground rules. And just civil, be respectful. It's okay if people have feelings, it gets a little heated. I don't mind that, but let's just keep it to a dull roar and, you know, maybe refrain from name calling and things like that. And then, as I said, no audio or visual recording allowed, no screenshots, phone should be off, you know, or in silence mode. And you should each be in a room alone, and only the people who are on the confidentiality agreement are allowed in this mediation. So can everyone agree with these ground rules? Hopefully everyone would say yes. Then I would say something like, so I want to make sure you put up to X hours to be here today. Everyone has enough time and your schedule's clear, and I get confirmation on that. And then I want to confirm that you folks are the decision makers here today, that there's nobody else that you need to consult about this matter, or if there is, who is it? So sometimes people will mention attorneys, or they'll mention a spouse or somebody else, and then we'll ask them, so could that person be available by phone during this mediation? So if we come to the end and we have a meeting of the minds, you can actually sign off on something, and we'll find out if that's the case. If for some reason folks are not comfortable doing the mediation together, we can, if there's any kind of safety issues, we can do the whole thing privately. It makes it a little bit longer, but we don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Okay, so in mediation, so a lot of people say mediation is the art of asking questions. So in mediation, we do a lot of listening. We reflect back what we've heard. So when each client gives their opening statement, you know, their list of why they're there and what the problem has been and what they're hoping to get out of it, we will reflect back to them what we heard in a summarized way, ask if we got it right. We don't mind if someone says, no, you did not get it right, and they correct us, because we want to make sure that we're listening carefully to them. So when we're working with the clients, we are going to be asking in these landlord-tenant situations, you know, hey, what's going on? Rental assistance, have you applied for it? What's the status of it? If you didn't, why not? A lot of people think you have to have gone on unemployment or something like that to be eligible. I just keep hearing from Jeff Gilbraith, who's the one who's been giving these talks, that they consider everyone in Hawaii County to have been affected by COVID in some way. So please don't self-select out from applying for rental assistance because you don't think you qualify. Really, the only thing you need to look at is the income qualifications, and that is the 80% of the area mean income, which in my opinion, because Hawaii is so expensive to live, it's quite high. A lot of people qualify. We're going to check out with the tenants, like, hey, what is your situation? What happened during COVID? What is it now? What do you expect it to look like in the future? Do you want to stay in this unit, or do you want to go? Some people are ready to move on, and other people really want to stay. So we are trying, the mediator's job is to help the landlord and tenant to negotiate. They obviously haven't been able to negotiate and work together. As the neutral third party, we're able to just assist that dialogue to happen and bring people together. Sometimes if it's your own conflict, you just can't do it on your own. Even mediators, we need outside help too. So we'll be talking to the landlord as well. You know, like, what is really your goal here? Are you trying to get the lost rent? Are you trying to get the tenant out and risking never recouping the back rent? Because frankly, they will have to go to court to get a judgment for that back rent. And then they will have to try to enforce the judgment via doing further court actions like, you know, collection agencies or garnishment. If someone has nothing, you can't get anything. So going for that rental assistance is it's a guaranteed way for the landlord to recoup 15 months of back rent. And if your rent was $1,000, which would be cheap for Hawaii, that's $15,000. If your rent's more like $2,000, that's $30,000. It's a lot of money. It's a good business decision for the landlord to try to get that money from the rental assistance programs because they still have money available. What was the situation before? We like to ask this. Did you, landlord, did you have a good relationship with your tenant? Tenant, did you have a good relationship with your landlord? If there was a good relationship, if someone was considered a good tenant, that goes a long way to feeling like, okay, maybe they just had some hardship, but if we get back on track with the rent, all will be well. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I keep hitting these buttons without meaning to. So if the landlord can recoup the back rent, some or all of it, would they consider renewing the lease? Would they consider keeping the tenant? Are they open to any kind of rent reduction? Are they open to waiving some or all of the back rent if the tenant would just leave because they just want to get the unit back? So we look at all of these possibilities. So mediation agreements, as I mentioned before, are as creative as the people there. So this is just a few examples of what might be in a landlord tenant Act 57 mediation agreement. So the landlord and tenant agree to work together to apply for rental assistance. It does take action on both the part of the landlord and the tenant. The tenant's got to get in a lot of information, a lot of paperwork, and the landlord also has to get in paperwork. They've got to do a W-9, they've got to get their direct deposit paperwork in order. And according to the Hawaii County Rental Assistance Program, one of the #1 reasons that people are not getting the rental assistance is they don't get in their complete packet or they stop communicating with the rental assistance program. So it really takes both the landlord and tenant working together to get that happening. Maybe another type of agreement is a payment plan. So if the rental assistance doesn't come through, then we agree to maybe add $500 to each month's rent for the next 24 months to make up back rent. And we're going to waive, the first 3 months during COVID, because I know that, not only did you lose your job, but your spouse died from COVID. Or the tenant's going to agree to move out and the landlord's going to waive, all the back rent, just keep the security deposit, and they're going to leave it at that. So those are 3 options. There's a lot of variations in there. So the idea behind Act 57 mediation agreements is that it's going to keep the landlord and the tenant out of court. It's going to help avoid the eviction process. So again, we just like to give lots of contact information here. When the tenant is getting the eviction notice, they should contact the nearest mediation center as soon as possible. East Hawaii, that is us, Kuikahi, at 808-935-7844 extension 8. And the landlords must immediately email the appropriate mediation center the 15-day notice. And here in East Hawaii, it's Landlord Tenant at hawaiimediation.org. So how can you folks help out in this process, either as individuals or if you represent community organizations? So please get the word out about this free program. We know from the rental assistance that people still don't know it's available and still don't know about it. So just talk it up. Help tenants know that they may get this notice and what it is. Don't ignore it. Don't put your head in the sand. Don't throw away. I know people in debt have the tendency to not want to deal with it. It's not a good idea. This law was designed to prevent eviction. It's designed to help the tenant remain housed, if at all possible. We need to schedule within 15 days of the notice. The landlord can and probably will move forward with court eviction if a mediation is not scheduled. And maybe you didn't understand how mediation was trying to do conflict prevention and resolution before this talk. So talking to people just in general about what mediation is and what it isn't is helpful. A lot of people mix up mediation and arbitration. Arbitration is basically like court, where there's an arbitrator. It's a private setting, it's informal. So it's like the arbitrator is sitting down with the 2 people in its own room. It's like a private judge, but still they're the one making the decision. The arbitrator is usually a attorney or judge who is looking at what the rule of law is and making a determination. It is another alternative dispute resolution modality. It's just the power still lies with the arbitrator. If you haven't figured it out already, in mediation, the power is residing with the people who are mediating. They get to make the decision about what they want to happen with their future. Sometimes people need help with the paperwork. We've had landlords who are not quite sure what to do. We have a link to the templates for the 15-day notices. For every island is on Rep Nakashima's website. And we have a link to that on our website, the hawaiimediation.org/landlord tenant, so that people can go and see what these 15-day notices are supposed to look like. Legal Aid has also put out a one sheet on what needs to be included in the notice. You know, help folks know that there's options for mediation. You know, maybe they could come, you know, use equipment somewhere else. They just need to be in a private situation. Maybe they need just Wi-Fi help. They can come into our center. And then sometimes people need a support person with them during a mediation. So like I said, caseworkers and other folks are welcome during mediation if it's going to help the process forward. So again, gathering the resources, figuring out how much money is owed. Everyone needs to agree on that, right? Do they know, does everyone know what back rent is owed? Can the landlord provide an accounting of all the back rent? Especially confusing if there's partial payments been made, or there's fees or late fees or whatnot. Legal Aid, great resource. Their website has a lot of information about housing right now, especially related to COVID. Talking to a housing counselor, financial counselor is a good idea to figure out where you are at, and then figuring out where else could I go if I cannot stay where I am now. So what are some of the benefits of this free program? I think I've been talking about that all along. So definitely it can improve relationships between people, especially ones that have been harmed, like between landlords and tenants when rent is not paid. I told you all about how mediation is different from court. The main points are it's private, it's informal, it's less intimidating, it can save on time, costs, and energy, and the mediator is not the decision maker, the participants are. It's a safe process. The mediators are trained to help people feel comfortable, to build rapport, and we're not like judging, or we don't need to see evidence. Nobody needs to prove their case to us or try to get us on their side and not be on the others. One thing that I like, mediations are neutral, impartial, unbiased third parties as much as a human being can be. We have to maintain self-awareness to do that. A new term I've learned recently is omnipartial, meaning we're on the side of everybody. And I love that. I feel like when I'm mediating, I'm on the side of all the parties and trying to find the solution that will work for them. Mediated agreements can help avoid court. They are private agreements between people, so it's like a private contract, meaning that that it can be binding and enforceable in a court of law if the terms are such. Obviously, sometimes agreements are very informal and they include things like we agree to stop giving each other stink eye. That would not be enforceable in court, but a payment plan could potentially be. So if a mediation agreement is not followed, we encourage people to call us and talk to us about it. Maybe we can have another mediation session. And then again, other legal options remain available. And really, this free mediation program is designed to help prevent eviction and homelessness. We don't need more people unhoused. So here is the contact information for the 2 mediation centers in East Hawaii and West Hawaii. Again, this is a free program. It's free, free, free. Landlord Tenant Eviction Mediation Program is free throughout the state. There are other centers who are offering it in the other counties. And you contact the center where the rental unit is located. So where the tenant is living, not where the landlord is, but where the tenant is residing. So that is all for my formal presentation today. I would love it if people have questions or comments that I could address. We do have about 10 more minutes in this session, and I'd love to talk story with you folks. If you'd like, I'm going to stop my screen sharing and then see if anybody has anything for me. And you could maybe unmute yourself and just ask the question, or you could write something in the chat, either one. And you can ask anything about mediation. It doesn't have to be specifically about this program, or about me, my role, or what it's like being a mediator, or anything at all. Don't be shy. Do you have any questions, Ray? You want to start? You want to start the ball rolling? I put you on the spot. Can't you think of a question, Ray?
Actually, Julie, that presentation was amazingly comprehensive and amazingly wonderful with everything that I know about what your organization does. Yeah, I'm totally blown away by everything that you do over there, you and your team. And I actually have no questions. It was so comprehensive and so wonderful and packed with so much good information that I think that folks are going to be able to benefit from this, especially with the ending of the eviction moratorium and people figuring out how they're going to pay their rent moving forward. This service is definitely something I feel people should access. But just in terms of contact, is it best to contact via email or phone? What's the best preference for your organization?
Oh, I'll put the landlord tenant at, hold on. So this is that's the email I put in the chat, the landlord tenant hawaiimediation.org for this program. And then if anyone wants to reach me, I'll put that. It's just my name, my first name, Julie at hawaiimediation.org. And if anyone here, would like me to present for their organization, I'm also happy to do that. We're continuing to try to get the word out on this program. So happy to do that at any time for anyone that wants it. So yeah, really appreciate you having me, Ray. I appreciate the Puna Virtual Resource Fair, and just everyone for listening here today.
Sounds great. Well, I don't actually see any more questions. So Julie, thank you so much for your time today and participating in our virtual resource fair. And hopefully come the springtime, we'll be able to chat a little bit more and maybe do another presentation in the spring.
Sounds great.
Great. Well, everyone, again, thank you for joining this session. And thank you, Julie, for a wonderful presentation. And we'll see you at the next session.
Ahui ho.
Thank you.